forbidden love shatters when a mother's rage drives Jimin away, leaving Jungkook changed forever in a cinematic tale of loss, guilt, and quiet redemption. The slap of porcelain against marble cracked the night open. "Leave," his mother said, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. Jimin stood frozen in the doorway, breath trembling, eyes shining like glass about to shatter, while Jungkook reached for him too late, fingers closing on air as the door slammed and the echo swallowed everything they had been. The rain came down hard, drumming on the windows, blurring the city into a smear of lights and regret. Jimin didn't cry as he walked into it. He folded his pain neatly the way he folded his shirts, careful, practiced, as if grief were another habit he'd learned to survive. Jungkook's mother stood rigid in the living room, hands shaking despite her authority, convinced she was saving her son from a future she feared. Jungkook felt something tear inside him, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet finality that would change the shape of his days. He chased the sound of Jimin's footsteps down the stairwell, the smell of rain and detergent and goodbye clinging to him, but by the time he reached the street, Jimin was already gone. Years later, Jungkook learned to live with the absence the way one learns to live with a limp. He trained harder, smiled brighter, spoke less. The apartment felt too large for one heartbeat, and he filled it with routines, midnight runs, black coffee, songs left unfinished, anything to keep from thinking about the way Jimin used to hum when he was nervous. His mother watched him from a distance, guilt pressing on her chest like a weight she couldn't name. She told herself it had been necessary, that love could be corrected like a course, that suns could be steered away from storms. Yet every time Jungkook flinched at raised voices, every time he slept with the lights on, her certainty thinned. Jimin, meanwhile, rebuilt himself in pieces. He found a small studio that smelled of dust and old wood, danced until his feet blistered, and learned how to breathe through the ache without letting it show. He avoided mirrors on bad days because they remembered Jungkook too well. There were offers, applause, a new city that didn't know his history, but loneliness followed him like a faithful shadow. He wrote letters he never sent, folded them away, and told himself that love didn't have to be returned to be real. When they met again, it wasn't dramatic. No music swelled. It was a grocery store aisle, fluorescent lights, a shared reach for the same carton of milk. Jungkook's hand shook. Jimin's smile was polite, practiced, a shield. They spoke of ordinary things, whether schedules, the price of fruit, while the past pressed close, warm and dangerous. Jungkook wanted to apologize for everything and nothing, to explain the night had never ended for him. Jimin listened, eyes kind but distant, carrying a strength born of survival. They parted with a nod that felt heavier than goodbye. Time did what it always does. It softened edges and sharpened truths. Jungkook confronted his mother not with anger but with clarity, naming the damage and the fear that had driven it. She listened, finally, the house quiet around them, the rain absent. Her apology was halting and imperfect, but real. Jungkook learned forgiveness didn't erase scars, it taught you how to live with them without bleeding. They found each other again by choice this time, not chance. Coffee cooled between them as they spoke honestly, without defenses. Jimin admitted the fear of being broken again. Jungkook admitted he had never been the same. There were no promises of forever, only the courage to try, to be present, to let silence be gentle instead of cruel. They walked together into an evening that smelled like citrus and asphalt, the city humming around them, not healed, but healing. In the end, Jungkook understood that losing Jimin had changed him irrevocably, and finding him again would not undo the past. It would build something new from it. Love, he learned, wasn't about defying storms or silencing mothers. It was about choosing each other in the quiet after the thunder, and being brave enough to stay. The door of the cafe closed behind them with a soft chime, and the quiet that followed felt louder than any argument. Jungkook broke it first. "You don't get to look at me like that," he said, voice low, tight, "like I'm already forgiven." Jimin's jaw clenched. "I'm not forgiving you," he shot back. "I'm surviving you." They walked without direction, words colliding as hard as their footsteps on the pavement. The city pressed in neon lights, honking cars, the smell of rain-soaked concrete, until Jungkook stopped beneath a flickering street lamp and finally said the thing that had been rotting in his chest for years. "I should have fought harder. I should have chosen you." Jimin laughed, sharp and bitter. "You did choose. Silence is a choice." The argument burned hot. pulling the past into the present like a wound torn open. Jungkook confessed how the night Jimin left, he'd slept on the floor by the door, convinced the house itself had betrayed him. Jimin fired back with his own truth, how he'd waited for a call that never came, how pride had kept him from turning back, how loneliness had taught him to sharpen his edges so no one could cut him again. Every sentence landed like a strike, and yet neither stepped away. Then Jungkook's mother appeared at the edge of the street, unexpected and pale, having followed him in fear and guilt. Her presence detonated the moment. Jimin stiffened, old instincts screaming to run, but Jungkook stepped in front of him, protective, defiant. "No," Jungkook said, voice shaking but firm, "you don't get to scare him anymore." Silence fell, thick and stunned. His mother's eyes filled, not with anger this time, but with the realization of what she had broken. "I was wrong," she whispered, the words trembling. "I was afraid, and I hurt you both." Jimin's breath hitched. The apology didn't erase the past, but it cracked something open. He spoke without looking at her. "I didn't leave because I was weak," he said. "I left because staying was killing me." The honesty hurt, but it was clean. Later, when the street had emptied and the night cooled, Jungkook and Jimin sat on the curb, shoulders almost touching. The heat between them hadn't faded. It had changed, turned raw and dangerous in a new way. Jungkook admitted he was terrified of wanting too much. Jimin admitted he was terrified of wanting at all. Their words softened, slowed, until silence returned, this time not as a weapon, but as a fragile truce. When they stood to part, Jungkook caught Jimin's wrist. "Stay," he said, not as a command, but a plea. Jimin looked at him for a long moment, eyes dark with everything unsaid, then gently loosened Jungkook's grip. "Not tonight," he replied, "but I'm not running anymore." Jungkook watched him walk away, heart pounding, knowing this was not an ending or a beginning, but the dangerous middle, where truths are spoken, defenses burn, and love, if it survives, must be earned again. The night didn't let Jungkook sleep. Every sound felt like a reminder, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant siren, the echo of Jimin's footsteps leaving him again, but not completely. By dawn, his chest was tight with a decision he could no longer postpone. He went to the one place he had avoided for years, his mother's house. "I can't keep living like this," Jungkook said the moment he stepped inside. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried a sharpness that startled them both. "I love him, I never stopped, and if you make me choose again, I won't hesitate this time." His mother stared at him as if seeing a stranger. "You'd throw everything away." "I already did," he replied, "the night you screamed at him." Across the city, Jimin stood in front of the mirror, fingers digging into the edge of the sink. He hated how his hands still shook at the thought of Jungkook, how one argument could unravel years of careful distance. He told himself to walk away again, to protect the version of himself he had rebuilt, but something inside him rebelled. For the first time, Jungkook had stood between him and the past. That mattered more than he wanted to admit. They collided again that evening, not by chance, but by confrontation. Jungkook showed up at Jimin's studio, rain clinging to his hair, eyes burning with urgency. "You don't get to decide this alone," Jungkook said, stepping inside before Jimin could protest. "I decide what hurts me," Jimin snapped back, "and you still do." "Then let me," Jungkook shot back. "Let me hurt with you instead of pretending I don't exist." The argument escalated fast, voices raised, words reckless. Jungkook accused Jimin of hiding behind strength. Jimin accused Jungkook of loving too late. Every sentence peeled back another layer, raw and exposed. When Jungkook confessed that he'd almost quit everything the year Jimin left, Jimin froze, shock cutting through his anger. "You never said that," he whispered. "You never stayed to hear it," Jungkook replied, regret heavy and honest. The tension broke not with a kiss, but with exhaustion. Jimin sank onto the floor back against the mirror, and Jungkook followed, close enough to feel the heat but not touch. They talked until their voices cracked, about fear, about resentment, about how love can survive silence but not cowardice. Jimin admitted he was scared that if he chose Jungkook again, he'd lose himself. Jungkook answered softly, "Then I'll choose you as you are, not who you were for me." Outside, the storm eased. Inside, nothing was resolved, but something had shifted. When Jungkook finally stood to leave, Jimin didn't look away this time. "If you disappear again," Jimin said quietly, "I won't chase you." Jungkook met his gaze, steady and certain. "I know," he said. "That's why I won't." They parted without promises, but with a truth that burned brighter than comfort. Whatever came next would be dangerous, public, controversial, and irreversible. And for the first time, neither of them wanted to run from that fire. Morning arrived with consequences. Jungkook woke to his phone vibrating non-stop, messages stacking like accusations he hadn't asked for but somehow deserved. A blurry photo, him outside Jimin's studio the night before, was already everywhere. Speculation ran wild, captions sharp and cruel, questions dressed as jokes. He exhaled slowly, the old instinct to disappear clawing up his spine, and then he did the one thing he'd never done before. He called Jimin. "You saw it," Jungkook said the moment Jimin answered. There was a pause, then a tired breath. "I live in this world, remember?" Jimin replied. "I always see it first." They met anyway. Privacy was a myth now, and pretending otherwise felt like another lie. In a quiet room that smelled faintly of coffee and dust, tension coiled tight between them. "This is what it costs," Jimin said, voice steady but eyes sharp. "If you stay near me, they will tear us apart for sport." Jungkook stepped closer, anger flashing. "They already did, years ago, and I let them." The argument ignited fast, hotter than before because it wasn't just personal anymore. It was public, irreversible. Jimin accused Jungkook of underestimating the damage, of romanticizing defiance without understanding the fallout. Jungkook fired back that Jimin had learned to preempt pain by choosing isolation, and that isolation was killing them both in different ways. "You think being alone makes you strong," Jungkook said, voice breaking. "It just makes you silent." "And you think being loud makes you brave," Jimin snapped. "It just makes you visible." A knock interrupted them, unexpected, unwelcome. Jungkook's mother stood there again, pale and trembling, holding a phone with the same image burned into it. "I didn't mean for this," she whispered, eyes fixed on Jimin. "I never thought it would follow you like this." Jimin laughed, a sound edged with old scars. "It always does." What happened next surprised all of them. Jungkook turned to his mother, not with fury, but with resolve. "This is the last time you step into this without listening," he said. "You don't get to decide which parts of me are acceptable." Her shoulders sagged. "I was afraid," she said again, softer. "So was I," Jungkook replied, "and I still chose him." The room went quiet. Jimin looked at Jungkook as if seeing him clearly for the first time, not the boy who reached too late, but the man standing now, willing to burn. "Don't do this for me," Jimin said, voice low. "Do it because you won't survive not doing it." Jungkook met his gaze. "I know." That night the city roared louder than ever, but something inside them steadied. They didn't touch. They didn't promise. They sat across from each other, trading truths that hurt and healed in equal measure. Jimin confessed the fear that if he let Jungkook in, the world would punish him for believing again. Jungkook confessed the terror that loving openly would cost him everything he'd built. Neither tried to fix the other. When they finally stood to leave, Jimin said quietly, "If this destroys us." "It won't," Jungkook interrupted. Then, softer, honest, "But if it tries, we face it together." Outside, cameras flashed, voices called out names, and the night swallowed them whole. They stepped forward anyway, not hand in hand, but side by side, aware that the hardest part was no longer the past, but the future they were daring to choose. The press conference was never part of the plan. That was the first thing Jungkook said when the room filled with murmurs and flashing lights, when Jimin felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came with being watched too closely. The air smelled like hot cables and nerves. Someone asked a careless question, then another, each one sharper than the last, trying to corner a truth that had lived quietly for years. "Are you together?" a voice called out. Jungkook didn't look at the reporters, he looked at Jimin. "Do you want me to lie?" he asked softly into the mic, a question meant only for him. Jimin's lips parted, anger and fear tangling in his throat. "I want you to understand what the truth costs," he replied, voice steady but eyes blazing. The room leaned forward. Jungkook nodded once, then faced the crowd. "I won't define my life by your comfort," he said. Gasps rippled, phones lifted. Somewhere in the back, Jungkook's mother stood frozen, realizing this was the moment she could never undo. Jimin felt exposed, raw, 1,000 memories clawing up at once. The night he was told to leave, the years of silence, the careful rebuilding. He stepped closer to Jungkook, not touching, but unmistakably present. Backstage, the fight exploded. "You didn't warn me," Jimin said, voice shaking now that the audience was gone. "I asked you," Jungkook shot back. "You answered." "You put me on trial," Jimin snapped, "in front of the whole world." "And you think hiding would have saved you?" Jungkook replied, pain cutting through his anger. "They were already watching. I just stopped pretending." The words hit deep. Jimin turned away, hands trembling, the mirror reflecting a man caught between rage and longing. "I learned to survive without you," he said quietly. "Don't make me relearn everything just because you're ready now." Jungkook stepped closer, voice breaking. "I wasn't ready then, I am now, and I'm terrified you won't be here when the noise dies down." Silence stretched, thick and unbearable. Then Jimin laughed, a soft, cracked sound. "You always talk like love is a battle you can win," he said. "Sometimes it's just something you endure." Jungkook shook his head. "Not this time, not alone." The backlash came fast. Calls were cancelled. Invitations vanished. The city felt colder, harsher. Jungkook's mother finally spoke, her voice small. "If I could take it back." "You can't," Jimin interrupted, not cruel, just honest. "But you can stop hurting him." She looked at Jungkook, tears falling freely now. "I'm trying," she whispered. Jungkook exhaled, years of tension loosening just a fraction. "Try louder," he said, "where it counts." That night, Jimin and Jungkook stood on a balcony overlooking the city, lights flickering like distant stars. The noise below couldn't reach them here. "I'm scared," Jimin admitted, finally letting it out. "Not of them, of us." Jungkook leaned on the railing, close enough to feel warmth. "Me too," he said, "but fear isn't a reason to disappear anymore." Jimin closed his eyes, breathing in the cool air, the weight of the day settling into something heavy but real. When he opened them, his voice was steady. "If we do this," he said, "there's no quiet ending." Jungkook met his gaze, unwavering. "I don't want quiet," he replied. "I want honest." They didn't kiss. They didn't promise forever. They stood there, city roaring below, choosing to stay in the fire a moment longer, knowing the next step would either break them completely or finally teach them how to stand without fear. The backlash didn't fade, it sharpened. Jungkook felt it in the sudden quiet of rooms that used to welcome him, in the way conversations stopped when he entered, in contracts rewritten with careful language that said everything without saying his name. Jimin felt it differently, like hands reaching for him from every direction, pulling, judging, demanding explanations he didn't owe. The world had decided their story belonged to everyone now. "You're bleeding because of me," Jimin said one night, packing the apartment Jungkook had offered without asking. His voice cut through the dim light. "And I won't be the reason you lose everything." Jungkook looked up from the couch, eyes red-rimmed but steady. "You think I didn't know this would happen?" "You think knowing makes it better," Jimin snapped. "You're still paying the price." "I'm paying the price of being honest," Jungkook shot back. "That's different." The argument burned hotter than any before. Jimin accused Jungkook of choosing spectacle over safety, of turning their pain into a statement. Jungkook accused Jimin of mistaking fear for wisdom, of calling retreat maturity when it was just another disappearance. Words collided, sharp and unforgiving, until Jimin finally said the thing he'd been holding back. "I left once because your family made me feel small," he said, voice breaking. "I won't stay if the world does the same." Jungkook stood, the room suddenly too small for his anger and his love. "Then tell me what staying looks like," he demanded, "because I'm done guessing." Jimin met his gaze, tears bright but unfallen. "It looks like you choosing yourself even if I can't," he said quietly. "It looks like me not being your test of courage." They didn't speak after that. Silence fell like ash, heavy and suffocating. Jungkook slept on the floor again, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because the memory felt deserved. Jimin watched from the doorway, chest tight, realizing that loving Jungkook meant living with a constant ache, the knowledge that their connection demanded sacrifices neither had been taught how to make. The next day brought another shock. Jungkook's mother arrived unannounced, eyes hollow, hands clenched. "I've been silent too long," she said, voice trembling. She turned to Jimin, bowed deeply, and stayed there, unguarded and small. I can't undo what I did, she continued, but I can stop hiding from it. If you leave again, let it not be because of me. Jimin swallowed hard, the old anger flaring and softening all at once. I didn't need you to bow, he replied. I needed you to see us. She nodded through tears. I see you now. That night, Jungkook and Jimin finally talked without fire. They sat on opposite sides of the room, exhaustion stripping their words of armor. Jungkook admitted he was terrified of becoming a symbol instead of a person. Jimin admitted he was tired of surviving at the expense of wanting. I don't know how to do this without losing myself, Jimin said. Jungkook answered softly, then don't lose yourself for me. Stand next to me when you can, step back when you must. Just don't disappear. Jimin closed his eyes, breathing through the fear. When he opened them, his voice was steady, resolute. I won't promise permanence, he said, but I'll promise presence. Jungkook nodded, relief and sorrow mingling. That's enough, he said, for now. They stepped outside together into a city that hadn't softened, into a future that remained loud and unforgiving. There were no hands held, no declarations made. Just two people choosing again and again to face the noise without denying the cost, learning slowly and painfully that love wasn't proven by how loudly you stood, but by how honestly you stayed. The scandal reached a breaking point when Jimin's name trended alone, stripped of context, twisted into something ugly. Jungkook found him staring at the screen, jaw tight, eyes distant. Turn it off, Jungkook said, reaching for the phone. Jimin didn't let go. I need to see it, he replied. I need to know what they're saying before it finds me anyway. The words on the screen were merciless, accusations dressed as concern, outrage pretending to be morality. Jungkook felt something snap. This isn't truth, he said, voice rising. This is noise. Jimin finally looked at him, a flash of heat breaking through the calm. Noise ruins lives, he said. You can afford to call it that, I can't. The fight that followed was brutal, stripped of tenderness. Jungkook accused the industry of cowardice and vowed to fight it openly. Jimin accused Jungkook of believing that defiance was always noble, of forgetting who would be crushed first. You'll survive this, Jimin said sharply. You always do. Jungkook recoiled. You think I'm untouched? I think you're protected, Jimin answered, and I never was. The truth landed hard. Jungkook's voice dropped. Then let me protect you now. Jimin shook his head, eyes burning. That's not love. That's a trade I didn't agree to. A knock cut through them. Management, uninvited, all polite menace and careful words. They suggested distance, optics, time apart. They spoke as if Jimin weren't in the room. Jungkook stood, fury controlled but unmistakable. He's not a liability, he said. He's a person. The room chilled. Jimin felt something unexpected rise, gratitude edged with fear. When the door closed, he exhaled a laugh that sounded close to a sob. You just burned another bridge, he said. Jungkook met his eyes. I'm done crossing bridges that only exist for me. That night Jimin packed a bag, not to leave forever, but to reclaim air. Jungkook watched, silent, fighting the old panic. I'm not running, Jimin said, reading his face. I'm choosing space before this turns into resentment. Jungkook nodded, swallowing. Tell me where you'll be. Jimin hesitated, then softened. I'll call. Days passed heavy and slow. Jungkook gave an interview alone, calm and unyielding, refusing to erase Jimin from the story. The backlash flared, then fractured. Some voices softened, some doubled down. Jimin watched from a distance, conflicted, moved by Jungkook's steadiness and terrified of what it demanded. When they finally met again, it was at dawn by the river, the city pale and honest. I thought leaving would make it easier, Jimin admitted. It didn't. Jungkook stepped closer. I thought staying quiet would help, he replied. It didn't. They spoke until the sun rose, about boundaries and fear, about choosing each other without losing themselves. Jimin confessed the deepest wound, that being loved publicly felt like standing naked in a storm. Jungkook confessed his, that hiding love had hollowed him out. They didn't solve everything. They didn't try. As the city woke, Jimin reached out, not desperate, not afraid. Jungkook took his hand steady. It wasn't a victory. It was an agreement to keep telling the truth even when it hurt and to stop mistaking endurance for strength.
The first time they walked into a public room together, the air shifted. It wasn't applause or boos that hit Jimin. It was the silence, the kind that weighs more than noise. Jungkook felt it too, the old reflex to shield, to step half a pace ahead. Jimin noticed and stopped him with a look. "Don't," he murmured. "Stand with me, not in front of me." Jungkook nodded, jaw tight. "I'm learning." The meeting unraveled quickly. Polite smiles turned sharp. Words like image and timing floated like threats. Someone suggested a narrative, clean, temporary, painless for everyone except the two of them. Jungkook leaned forward. "You're asking us to lie," he said calmly. Jimin cut in before anyone could respond. "You're asking me to disappear," he said, voice steady, eyes blazing. "Again." The room froze. Jungkook's mother, seated quietly at the end, finally spoke. "Enough," she said, surprising even herself. "I watched silence destroy my son once. I won't watch it happen again." Heads turned. Lines were crossed. There was no undoing it. Jimin felt something loosen in his chest. Not forgiveness, not relief, but recognition. Outside, the fight detonated. "You didn't have to say that," Jungkook told Jimin, anger and pride colliding. "Yes, I did," Jimin shot back. "I won't let them rewrite me to make you easier to sell." Jungkook's voice cracked. "I'm not asking you to be easier." "I know," Jimin said softly. "That's why this hurts." They argued all the way home, heat rising, truth spilling. Jimin admitted he still flinched when doors slammed, that nights sometimes smelled like rain and old detergent, and he couldn't breathe. Jungkook admitted the guilt never slept, that some mornings he woke already apologizing to an empty room. They yelled, then went quiet, then yelled again, until the words finally ran out. What followed wasn't tenderness, it was honesty stripped bare. "I love you," Jungkook said, not as a plea but a fact. Jimin swallowed. "I love you," he answered, "and I hate that love made me small once." "Then don't be small," Jungkook said. "Be loud, be difficult, be here." The days after were brutal and bright in equal measure. Statements released, lines drawn, some doors closed for good, others cracked open unexpectedly. Jimin learned what it felt like to be seen without apology. Jungkook learned what it cost to keep standing when the ground refused to steady. They fought less, spoke more. When fear came, they named it instead of running. On a quiet evening, they sat on the floor, backs against the couch, city lights breathing through the window. "I don't know what we look like in a year," Jimin said. Jungkook smiled faintly. "I know what we look like now." Jimin leaned into his shoulder, careful, real. "Different," he said. "Better," Jungkook replied, "because it's chosen." They stayed there, not perfect, not protected, but present. Two people who had learned that love wasn't proven by endurance or sacrifice alone, but by the courage to refuse erasure together in the open. The noise didn't disappear, but it changed. It lost its power to define them. Jimin realized it one quiet morning when he woke before Jungkook and didn't feel the old urge to count exits, to measure how fast he could leave if everything collapsed again. Sunlight crept across the floor, warm and ordinary. Jungkook slept on his side, breath slow, one hand curled like he was still holding onto something even in dreams. For the first time in years, Jimin didn't feel like a guest in his own life. Jungkook woke to find Jimin watching him, expression unreadable. Panic flickered automatically. "What?" he asked. Jimin shook his head. "Nothing," he said. Then after a beat, "I'm still here." Jungkook closed his eyes, relief hitting hard enough to sting. "So am I." They talked less about surviving and more about living. Not grand plans, not heroic speeches, just choices made daily, sometimes clumsy, sometimes brave. Jungkook learned when to stand beside Jimin instead of in front of him. Jimin learned that staying didn't mean shrinking, that love didn't have to cost him his voice. They still argued, still hurt each other in small human ways, but the fear underneath it all began to loosen its grip. Jungkook's mother watched them from a careful distance, learning how to love without control. Her apologies turned into actions, public, private, consistent. Jimin didn't forgive her all at once. He didn't need to. What mattered was that she no longer stood between them. One evening, after the city had gone soft with rain, Jungkook said quietly, "I used to think losing you was the worst thing that ever happened to me." Jimin looked at him, eyes steady. "And now? Now I know it taught me who I refused to be again." Jimin exhaled, something heavy finally leaving his chest. "I thought leaving was the only way to stay alive," he said. "Turns out staying on my terms takes more courage." Jungkook smiled, gentle, real. "You were always brave, I just didn't know how to keep up." They didn't seal it with promises about forever. They didn't need to. They stood at the window together, city lights reflecting in the glass, two silhouettes no longer blurred by fear or silence. What they had was imperfect, public, and undeniably theirs. Jimin had once left after being shouted out of a house that was never meant to hold him. Jungkook had never been the same after that night, but in choosing each other again, not as an escape, not as a rebellion, but as a truth, they became something new.